Well, the Constitution took days and nights, but the writers still had to go look at it twice. Cause the states that reviewed it said, here's some advice. It should guarantee freedom, yeah, that would be nice. So the founders said, alright, and wrote the Bill of Rights. Yep, the first 10 amendments are the...
So what is the Constitution? What is the Bill of Rights? What does it give us the right to do? Where do we get these rights? How are they protected? All very good questions. Well, let's take a look back to over 200 years ago where it all began. All the way back to the Constitutional Convention, which took place from May 25th to September 17th, 1787. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 was a conference held in Philadelphia in which state delegates met to discuss changes to the Articles of Confederation which had been passed since 1781. But after some debate, it became apparent to the representatives that a new constitution was needed. A lot of the debates erupted over representation in Congress, slavery, and over the new executive branch. Many of these debates were held in secret so that the delegates would feel free to speak their minds. One of the primary goals of the Constitution was to create a government that would be powerful enough to run the country, but would not impose on people's or state rights. To avoid too much power being held by one person or group, they created the balance of power between the three branches of government: the executive, legislative, and judicial. The Constitution created a strong national government and gave certain rights to the states. But what about the rights of the actual citizens? Who was going to protect the natural rights of the Americans who had just fought a revolution to protect their freedoms? They wanted these freedoms to be protected in writing. Some delegates like Madison, Gerry, and Randolph believed so strongly that the rights of the individuals should be protected that they refused to sign the Constitution until a Bill of Rights was written to protect the freedom and the rights of the individual. It was finally promised that a Bill of Rights would be attached to the Constitution, and one by one, the states voted to ratify the Constitution. The first election under the new Constitution took place in January 1789, where, you guessed it, George Washington was elected the first president of the United States, and John Adams was chosen as the vice president. The first Congress consisted of 55 representatives and 22 senators, and one of their first jobs was to add the Bill of Rights to the Constitution. These would become the first changes or amendments to the document. James Madison, also known as the father of the Constitution, went to work and wrote 12 amendments, 10 of which were ratified and became known as the Bill of Rights, which was adopted December 1791. He believed these rights were the natural rights that belonged to all humans and that it would ensure the freedoms of American citizens. So how can someone change the Constitution? Well, the framers of the Constitution did not want to make it too easy for changes to be made to the document, so they made the process fairly difficult. The first step is to propose an amendment. There is two ways to do this. 1, 2/3 of both houses of Congress can vote to propose an amendment, or 2/3 of the states can request special concessions to propose an amendment. The second step, the amendment must be ratified. 3/4 of the states must approve the amendments before it becomes part of the Constitution. That is a lot of people that have to agree. Can you guess how many amendments have been made to the Constitution in the last 230 years? Only 27 amendments have been approved, including the Bill of Rights. Now finally, on to what you've all been waiting for. What are the Bill of Rights? What exactly did Madison feel were the natural rights that should be protected under these amendments? Well, they can be grouped into personal rights, legal rights, and other rights. First 4 amendments protect your personal rights. Let's start with the First Amendment, which might be one of the best known. Amendment 1. Freedom of religion, speech, and the press. The right to assemble and petition. This protects your rights to express your feelings. It allows people to establish and freely practice any religion that they like, to speak their own ideas and opinions, allows for freedom of the press to publish the news and ideas as long as they are true. It protects the rights of its citizens to hold meetings and to petition the government if they have done something that they do not like. Amendment 2, the right to bear arms. This protects your right to personal protection. The Second Amendment gives the right to maintain a well-regulated militia, which is a group of local men who would act like a military force in times of emergency and it gives all citizens the right to bear arms. Why was this so important back then? Well, at the time it was written, the national military was not very strong, and the citizens needed to help protect themselves against Native American attacks, potential attacks from other countries, and even their own government. Do people interpret it the same way that it was intended to be interpreted back then? You've probably heard news stories about this recently. Many people argue that it is the right of people to own guns for their own self-defense, while others want more laws to prevent people from owning guns and argue that only organized groups should own weapons. The courts in 2008 ruled that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to own a gun for personal use and protection within the home. There has also been much discussion about whether to limit the kinds of guns that can be sold and if a background check should be required to purchase a gun. So even though this amendment has been around for over 200 years, it is still heavily debated. Amendment 3, Housing of Soldiers. This protects your home and its use. Think back to the events leading up to the American Revolution. As a result of the Boston Tea Party, the king enacted the Intolerable Acts, which included the Quartering Act. No, this has nothing to do with money. It was when the colonists were forced to house soldiers in their homes, feed them, and give them supplies. The Third Amendment made it unlawful for government to make a private citizen house soldiers in times of peace. Amendment 4. Searches, seizure, and warrants. This protects your personal property and your belongings. This amendment protects people from law enforcement entering their home without their permission or a search warrant if they have probable cause. Probable cause means that there's enough evidence to show that a crime has likely been committed. The police must have this evidence before any arrest or search. This was very important at the time, as under the King's rule, British tax collectors could use general warrants to enter and search any house they wanted without needing evidence of wrongdoing. The Founding Fathers wanted to protect people from this sort of invasion of privacy from the government. This amendment is still very important to this day. The next 4 amendments protect your legal rights. Amendment 5, Rights in Criminal Trials and the Rights of Property. Have you ever heard a person say, "I take the Fifth"? I bet you have also heard, "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law," also known as the Miranda rights, which the police are required to recite before they can question a suspect. These are both referring to the Fifth Amendment, which says that a person does not have to testify against themselves in a criminal trial. Citizens also have a right to due process, which refers to a fair trial, double jeopardy, which means a person cannot be tried more than once for the same crime, and finally, eminent domain. People's personal property cannot be taken away without them being paid for it. Who knew the Fifth Amendment covered so many things? Amendment 6, Rights to a Fair Trial. This protects a person's rights during trial. This amendment requires a person accused of a crime to receive a speedy trial by jury, which did not happen in England during this time. People were held in jail for years before their trial, and often the trial was held in secret. Under the Sixth Amendment, the accused will have a public trial, an impartial jury of their peers when one is required, and they must be told what they are being accused of. We don't want people sitting in jail for years not even knowing what they supposedly did. Also, to further protect the accused, any witness must testify, and the accused is guaranteed a lawyer even if they cannot afford one. Amendment 7, Rights in a Civil Trial. This protects your right at a non-criminal trial. The Seventh Amendment allows a civil case to be decided by a jury trial when the amount of money involved is over $20. Remember, this was written over 200 years ago. $20 was a lot more back then. It was more than a month's wage for the average worker. Today, a dispute must be over $75,000 to be heard by a federal court. The writers of the Bill of Rights wanted to make sure that the government would not do away with the trial by jury. They were concerned that if trials were only decided by judges, the judges would side with the government, giving the government too much power. Amendment 8, Bail, Fines, and Punishment. This protects the rights of criminals. The Eighth Amendment does not allow for unfair bail. The judge may decide that the accused may be set free until trial, but they must pay bail, which is returned when the trial is over. The price is set based on the seriousness of the crime and the risk that the person may run away. This part of the amendment assures that the bail will not be set too high that no one could possibly pay it. The amendment also does not allow for excessive fines, meaning that when a person or organization is charged a fine, That amount should fit the crime. For example, you would not pay a $1 million fine for littering. The final right protected under the Eighth Amendment is the use of cruel and unusual punishment. The framers wanted to eliminate the use of torture on suspected criminals or as a punishment for a crime. They can no longer cut off your hand for stealing a loaf of bread, or place a person in stocks, or even burn a person alive. The last two amendments refer to the things that might not have been put into the Constitution, but should still be protected. And most importantly, they both protect you and limit the federal government. They are called the non-rights amendments. The rights not listed in the Bill of Rights belong to the states and the people. Amendment 9. Rights kept by the people. This protects other natural rights that were not listed. Some of the delegates thought that if a right was not listed in the Bill of Rights, it might be interpreted to mean that the people did not have that right. The Ninth Amendment protects the rights people have. It says that all the rights not listed in the Constitution belong to the people, not the government. In other words, the rights of the people are not limited to just the rights listed in the Constitution. People are allowed to pursue happiness in any way they want. They can dye their hair blue, they have the right to clean water, they can be a vegan, they can paint their house pink and purple polka dots, you can marry who you wish, you have the job you desire, and so many other things. And finally, Amendment 10. Powers kept by the states and the people. This protects us from the government taking too much power. The rights not given to the national government are rights kept by the states or the people. The 10th Amendment was added to ensure that the powers of the federal government remain limited. The writers of the 10th Amendment wanted to make it clear that the power of the federal government comes from the states and the people, not the other way around. After listening and learning about the importance of the Bill of Rights and how the forefathers were looking out for us even then, I hope you appreciate your freedoms, because even in today's world, not all countries allow these basic rights and freedoms to their citizens.